It's must be a busy time. Like obviously you're still quite recent into the new role as well. And hope it's all going well. The results seem to have been very good as well.
Yeah, it's going well, thanks. Yeah, obviously it's been a bit of a whirlwind, and as with every club at the moment, I think we're all facing lots of different challenges around getting games to go ahead for well, COVID initially, and then the weather has also created a few challenges for us. So I think it's not been quite so smooth running as I think we'd like with the game with the WSL, but obviously we're doing as much as we can.
No, it's great to hear. And I suppose for the attendees and stuff like that, because like having met you in previous roles and stuff like, it'd be great to hear kind of like how you got to where you are now and like kind of your coaching journey, if possible. If that's okay with you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think I've been fortunate. I suppose is probably the place I should start in the fact that I've always only been in football. And when I started coaching, obviously, there wasn't really full-time jobs just in the women's game for coaching at that moment in time. But as with a lot of other people in that moment, I sort of started out as a female development officer really in a football club, and like many others, people were doing that through county FAs and that type of thing. And ultimately, it kind of sort of developed from there really, in that I got injured actually, which is why I started coaching a little bit more. That was kind of what probably brought it forward, to be honest. And over the time that I was doing the role as a development officer, I was doing about 5 other jobs. I was a Centre of Excellence director, setting up a pathway for youth teams, leading into a first team that didn't exist initially when I started. Working with England with youth teams at that point as a coach educator, running elite performance camps on behalf of England as well. And, all those jobs were alongside like a full-time job, basically, in order to do the sort of one thing that you wanted to do, which was to coach teams. So throughout all of those steps, I guess, it sort of made me get a lot of different experiences through things like dealing with a board to tell them that it was really important we had girls teams and a women's team to sort of feed that into at Leicester, through to going to Arsenal and playing in a Champions League, having a Champions League semi-finals before I sort of went abroad really. So there was a sequence of events, I suppose, throughout my journey that have always meant I've stayed on the grass, but I've done quite a few different roles in order to make that happen when there wasn't full-time jobs just with a team. I kind of got to a point, I suppose, when I was with Arsenal. I spent 3 years there, which I obviously really enjoyed off the back of leaving Leicester and doing those bits, with the Super League when it first started and that sort of thing. That I didn't really see that the game was going to go into a full-time position for me with a team straight away. So I went abroad to the USA. And that's always been one of my kind of key drivers, I suppose, is to be able to stay on the grass. And so I went out there just to focus on coaching, really, more than anything, and worked with boys, girls out there, obviously trying to get into a college scholarship program and that type of thing, which was great. And then I ended up coming back for a job with the Wales national team, and that was with the 17s, 19s and the seniors. So it was great from a context of working across different age groups. And when I'd worked with England prior to leaving, I'd worked with the youth teams as well. And then, something evolved back within the England setup. And I went back there working with the 19s and 21s before working with the seniors with Phil Neville, just before I got this job, really. So I think all of those, the common things across the board, I suppose, are that I've always worked in elite football, but to be honest, elite has changed the meaning for over the last 20 years. What was elite 20 years ago would not even be classed as anything near right now. So the game's obviously evolved significantly. And I think throughout all of those different roles that I've been able to do, they've all actually equipped me in a different way probably to be doing the job that I'm doing now. And actually it's great because I've got quite a lot of different experiences that I can sort of draw on when I sort of need that, and the support network that's evolved through doing those things also comes in really handy, as you can imagine, when lots of things are going on, and you need a little bit of a leveling off period and some support from that. So yeah, it's been a busy 20 years, I'd say, Stephen. I think you of all people know what that's like in this game, but it's been an enjoyable one. I think there's been lots of different experiences that have been real good highlights for me over that time so far.
Yeah, it's an incredible journey that you've been on in order to get to where you are, and it just shows like how success can come about. Were there any like kind of, not even from your playing days, were there any kind of like coaching role models that you took bits of information from, or any hints and tips that you learnt along the way?
Yeah, I mean a lot. There's I think at the time, I think we've probably got to put into perspective when I started coaching what was actually around at the time. There's less than a handful of jobs full time in the women's game at that moment in time. And I think the thing for me was I had a lot of my early education through coach ed, obviously. And, in that I sort of was able to be on a course really through my A license and a couple of other things with Dick Bate, who, loads of people will know because of the influence that he had on the game and on people, the way he coached. I felt his energy and enthusiasm for the game was just, you couldn't not feel it. It was infectious, to be honest, to be around him. And I think just how he sort of loved the game so much was kind of how I felt, but I was nowhere near in a position to kind of put it across in the same way that he did. And I think it always gave me something to sort of strive towards, to be fair, when I listened to him coach and how he put things across simply and got players to kind of get on board with that. I think, Hope Powell's was a massive influence in my early career. She gave me an opportunity with England, and at the time, some of the things that she had to sort of go through to help to develop the game was just really tough. Like, I don't think we probably appreciated what that was like, trying to enhance the women's game at that moment in time with like no money and sort of not that great support, but she sort of fought that corner to pave the pathway for where we all are now, really. I mean, the time spent on that with some other key people in that was really sort of inspiring to see someone going out on a limb to try and really fight for what they believed in. And I genuinely saw that, whenever I was around her. And I think, I've been really lucky, there's a few people I can talk about here, but I suppose the interesting thing is when you see contrast, to be honest, Steve, like Hope Powell had a very specific way of getting messages across and getting things done. When I was at Arsenal, I was with Laura Harvey, and she was very different in terms of how she coached and delivered. And I actually thought that the two differences had completely different effects on players, but really worked in a different way, sort of thing. And Laura and I sort of, keep in touch and everything. We had a good time together, to be fair, during that spell at Arsenal. But I think she has a very simple way of looking at the game. And I think it kind of is quite grounding, which players kind of latch onto fairly quickly. So she's definitely a different sort of ally, if you like. And I just think, there's so many good females in the game. Mo Marley is incredible. She's not had the career that she's had for no reason. It's no mistake. So I've been fortunate to work with her for the last 3 years or so. So that's been great. And I think there's loads of strong women that are in the game that are doing really well. Leanne Hall's another one who I did my A license with, who is just attention to detail to the nth degree and keeps you right on your toes whenever you discuss anything. So she's a good one to talk tactics with, for sure.
No, and it's great. I suppose like you mentioned the word contrast in there, and obviously there's a contrast of coaches, isn't there? All who, rightfully so, have had success in their ways, but there's so many different ways of success. How, again, last little bit before we go on to the next question, how did you find the contrast between leaving the UK to go to US and how that game was, and then actually just coming back and seeing the change? Because it's obviously come on quite a lot, like the the women's game within the UK, especially within the current era, as you said, like, was that a big contrast to what you were expecting when you came back?
I knew that it had evolved. I think, if I'm being really honest, at the time that I left, I was quite disillusioned with the game, because there was a lot of conversations about the development of the game. But as I say, there still wasn't the commitment to sort of put full-time positions in place with teams when I left. And I left in 2013, and we were actually in the WSL really at that point, So it was quite difficult to see what was going to happen. So going out into the States with it being such an ingrained culture was quite refreshing, and probably what I needed at the time, to be honest, that it was absolutely the norm, and there was a commitment to it. So when I came back, obviously, because I should say, when I was at Arsenal, I was a consultant coach. So I had a full-time job with the FA at that moment in time. So I wasn't even full-time with the team, even though we were in the Champions League. So it was quite difficult to actually do what I felt was the job I wanted to do, at that moment. So when I came back, obviously the game, we'd done well in some major tournaments as an England national team. That had obviously elevated the scope of the game a little bit more, which is great. The sponsorship started to improve. Things like that had started to change, and clubs were obviously putting more money into supporting the teams. So coming back into it was a very different landscape to sort of how I left, if you like, all for the right reasons. So I think in both respects, the time that I went and the time that I came back actually worked quite well, for where the game had evolved.
Because where do you think those, like, where the biggest difference are in the game? Because obviously when you hear, like, playing and as a coach, and then probably coming into the FA and probably Tottenham as well, whereby now you look at just the amount of support staff alone, the size of that must have increased massively compared to what you were potentially used to when you were a player within the women's game.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. When I started coaching, there was me and an assistant, and I had my van that carried around the kit, So and we had a physio coming in once a week. But yeah, I think obviously the support staff has been a massive, significant shift, and the fact that I think you could put a lot of things under this heading, but professionalism has been the key side to it. We've gone from players working 2 jobs and things like that to be able to play, and staff doing the same, to just being able to focus on being a professional athlete and being a professional coach or physio in the women's game, whatever that might be, that job title. And I think the biggest shift around that, you can't really put it down to one thing, I suppose, but there's definitely been a shift since things like the success in 2015 in the World Cup from an England perspective. The women's game has got more on a world stage with viewers, etc., that have enabled there to be more publicity, and the coverage and the sponsorship is just worlds apart from obviously what it was when I was playing. And I think the ability to just focus solely on being an elite athlete obviously has raised the level of the game again, because people can just focus on doing that and doing that well. So it's become a more attractive game for obvious reasons. And I think that's now lending itself to obviously, continuing that growth with role models in the game. You're getting more girls wanting to play football. There's more buy into it from a club's perspective, and as I say, sponsorship that then grows the game even more and gets it out there even more. So I think all those things definitely play a part in the growth.
It's interesting you talked then about, like, different growth within the game. You go from, again, throughout your career, you've had those different experiences. How has it been, and how has your coaching potentially adapted with different levels of play? So going from someone like with the university games teams, for example, students, or even lower, like, kind of level, amateur level, to then, and again, this was one question that's come through from the audience as well, so it was good timing, to the likes of Alex Morgan, Abby McManus now, who and those England and Tottenham players. How does that compare in the transition of what your coaching has done across that?
Yeah, I think, as the game's grown, I suppose it's grown at like, sort of similarly to where I've kind of like, I've come through that kind of coaching era of growing with the game, I suppose. So, working with, in my first team that I worked with, like I was a new coach at that point and made loads of mistakes and, wanted to do things in a certain way that, players maybe weren't ready for at that moment in time. And how I managed that, was obviously I wanted to keep progressing, and so sort of moved in that trajectory, I suppose, towards trying to work with like-minded people as much as I can, and I suppose through that it's been a real sort of challenge and test that's been great for me to kind of work with under 19s at England, for argument's sake, or 21s, working with world-class seniors at Arsenal, and going back to that now in terms of what I'm doing and what I was doing with England just before I left. I think the differences are just the understanding as to where they're at in terms of their own professionalism and potential. I think with younger players, you're talking about them starting to realize what it's going to take and who they are as people, as well as who they are as players, and trying to sort of support and educate that whole kind of evolution for them in their own game. And so there's a slightly different approach to dealing with Abby McManus or Alex Morgan, whose careers are, they know exactly what they're about and they know what it takes for them to be able to be in a position to perform and win. So their stages are obviously a little bit different. So the conversation tone is obviously very different, between that and under 21 trying to get a senior first team spot to a world 3-time World Cup winner. It's very different. But I think ultimately the way that you kind of evolve relationships is to understand who they are as people and to work out where you sit and fit to be able to help them to develop to the best of their ability, because senior players always want to learn. The best pros still want to learn. So it's just a slightly different way of approaching that, in terms of they've just got a bit more idea as to what that's going to look like for them, versus trying to help shape that and get younger players to understand that a little bit more. But ultimately my job really is to get the best out of people, and I've got to be able to get to know them really well to be able to help that. That's kind of where I see my role, if you like, across those different levels.
Yeah, and that's really fascinating and really interesting. And I suppose when you look at trying to get the best out of people as well, like you talk about senior players, junior players, is that, how have you actually changed your mindset now, trying to help get the best out of the growing staff around you now as well, and all the different dynamics of a multidisciplinary team?
Well, I think the thing for me about any successful team is, like, we've got to all know which direction we're going in as a start point, and if we all kind of agree and buy into that and believe that that's the right thing to do, I think it then sort of helps you to get the best out of people through determining what their roles are, and like get some clarity around how each of them contribute to the success of the team. And I think once you start to have those conversations with individuals and where their strengths lie and how they can kind of drive that forward, I think you start to sort of get the best out of them in that context as well. And people having the freedom to have the autonomy to drive their departments and be experts in their roles, and actually make us be the top performing team that we could potentially be, I think is really important. And that's quite a lot, that's quite a lot to ask, I suppose, for some people. But I think ultimately you're trying to give people, empower people to do the things that is going to make them stand out for being great in their job, and obviously to drive it forward from a performance perspective. I mean, we're now sort of around, I actually would need to count this, I feel like there's 12 staff, 13 maybe at Tottenham, and
Yeah.
I came out of an MDT which was around 11 with youth teams at England, to there was about 25 with the seniors at England. And if you don't sort of have good communication processes and clarity on people's roles, it can be a bit of a minefield where you're just obviously managing staff and that day to day versus people just being able to excel in their own job and get on with it and lead it and drive it. So there's quite a lot of work, I think, got to go into developing those relationships with the staff and getting everybody on the same page as to what the direction of travel is. But beyond that point, I think it's just tweaking and evolving things as we go. And that's kind of, that's the way that I approach it anyway.
No, thank you. And this is a question that's coming from the audience as well. So I suppose when you talk about the evolution in there, what we've seen kind of recently is a like the recent knowledge around the menstrual cycle and how to train is obviously increasing as we go through. Like, so the question from the audience is, from a coaching's perspective, how does that information help inform your coaching, or does it, or do you leave it to the relevant people within the multidisciplinary team as well?
No, I think you have to bear it in mind, in female athletes for sure, because the changes that happen on a monthly basis for each individual are often they are very different, and having no awareness of that, I think, puts you at risk of not getting the best out of people at times when they probably need to sort of be approached or managed on pitch a little bit differently. So I think it's important that we utilize all the knowledge that we gain from this stuff. Obviously, the medics and our strength and conditioning coach are at the forefront of collating that information and being on top of that. But definitely, I change things and manage people differently in sessions, as in to modify them if needed at times that I'm advised to do, really, because I think it's the only way to sort of move forward with it. And it is something that we don't probably know enough about at the moment, Steve. Like we're just obviously trying to do more research around this. And I know Dawn Scott's doing a lot of work on this at the moment. And I think we'll all benefit from the research that's done. But at the moment, we're just trying to raise awareness, I suppose, within Tottenham of what that looks like, and work with players on them being really honest about, how they're feeling and how that does affect their training, so that we can get the best out of everyone and not obviously put them at any risk.
There's so many different I'll use the play. There's so many different plates to spin when you're trying to be a coach, and you've got not just players to manage, you've got staff to manage and stuff like that in order to achieve success. I suppose probably the question I'd ask before we start to wrap up and go on to the last one is, what is success for you, both within your current role, and what was success for you previously as well?
That's a great question. It's a big one as well. So I think the things, if I look back on the things that I've felt where I've achieved the most, or that I suppose I've been the happiest with, are things when I see people achieving their potential makes a big difference to me. So through different teams, and when you've sort of worked with someone and you've seen them being able to put some of the things that you've helped them to evolve into practice, and they've got things like senior international caps and things like that through time that you've sort of spent together, seeing people achieve things like that, that's their goals and dreams, I think is a big success story. So, I think you have to be a little bit careful in the game about results, being purely results orientated on what you base your success on, because football just, it has its peaks and troughs. And, if you purely basing success on results and not the journey and the performance, I think it can sort of chew you up and spit you out a little bit if you're not careful. So I think the biggest thing for me right now is we're on a bit of a journey at Tottenham, and the club is very progressive and is looking to be sustainable at the top end of the game, really, and represent the club as it should be through, a really solid, consistent women's team. And I think right now for me, the success comes out of the steps that we're putting in place on a day-to-day basis that are enabling us to perform and function at the level that the players are capable of. And I think getting the consistency of that will take care of its results, and it will sort of see us creeping up the table and being a little bit more competitive with other teams within this league and making that sustainable and having a sort of legacy in place with facilities that are, you know, what they should be for a women's team at this level, you know, and a pathway that's aligned to that is a big project at the moment, and something that I think is really important for Tottenham Women's Football Club.
No, that's great to hear, and hopefully within that journey, accounting for about 2 or 3 foot of snow that you've had down in London,
Yeah,
can be reduced as well. So I suppose just to kind of bring this chat to a conclusion, it's been great to speak to you again and hear about everything. So thank you very much again. And the last question to wrap it up: if you were able to speak to your early stage career self and say anything or give yourself any advice, what would it be and why?
I like there's loads of things I would say, Steve. There's loads. But I think you know, I think one of the things that I sort of feel quite strongly about, I suppose, is that the women's game has obviously, it took a little bit of time to evolve. And I think for me, I'd probably say to not be apologetic about being in the women's game, and that we should be asking for more and we should be trying to drive the game forward. And I think it's okay to do that. And at times throughout my career, I suppose there's been certain things that I suppose have happened or said, you know, to female coaches and things like that, that have probably sort of held people back a little bit at times. And it's been because the game hadn't quite evolved, but there's been so many people who have, you know, sort of stuck to the guns and fought for it. And I think it can kind of grind you down a little bit. So I think the biggest thing I'd say is, you know, just keep doing what you're doing because it's for the right reasons, and the game will improve and be doing the things that it should be doing to represent female athletes and women in sport the way that it should be. So keep having the sleepless nights and planning all those sessions to keep moving it forward. Yeah, that'd probably be my biggest thing.
I'm sure the invention of Red Bull or a good cup of coffee has probably helped those sleepless nights as well.
Yeah, for sure.
But no, look, Rehanne, it's been brilliant speaking to you again, and thank you very much as well. And not just because you guys are using Playermaker as well, but I do wish you all the success for the rest of the WSL season and beyond. And it's great to obviously see how the team's results have improved since you've gone in as well. So I hope it keeps going for you as well.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Thanks very much for having me. And there's been some great information on obviously these webinars today, and I look forward to hearing some of the rest this evening.
No worries. Thank you, Rehanne. And just on that note as well, it's time for